Hey, Father Colm here, chaplain for the Vigil Project. I just want to have a very brief conversation with you about a relationship which exists, which some of us maybe look over or neglect to realize at times. But there is a relationship between beauty, art, and the spiritual life, and how those two are very closely related. Think of a Gothic cathedral. Think of the great cathedrals of France and of Germany and throughout Europe. These cathedrals were constructed in such a way as to draw the people in to something more than themselves. Right? So often we'll say, well, the beauty and the art in the church, is that just kind of like an accessory? Is that just kind of fluff? No. Rather, when we encounter beauty, it brings us outside of ourselves. One of the greatest cathedrals in France, Chartres Cathedral, it was once said of that when you walk in, it's the kind of place that makes an atheist feel uncomfortable. And the reason was not because of some kind of imposing reality of the church, but simply because the beauty, so otherworldly, draws us outside of ourselves. It's precisely in that reason why we can say that, yeah, there is a relationship between beauty and the spiritual life. Because beauty always demands a response, always demands that I give some kind of assent or rejection to it. It's the only way in which I can encounter beauty is by making a response. It demands a response. So yes, for us as Catholics, we're very serious about the fact that art and the spiritual life must go together, that it draws us deeper, that it leads us to an encounter with something not of this world, namely God himself. Our own angelic doctor of the church, St. Thomas Aquinas, gave us 3 principles which he identified as the things which constitute whether or not something is beautiful or not, whether it participates in beauty or not. Integritas, claritas, and consonantia. Translated, those basically mean integritas is integrity, claritas is the clarity of something, and then consonantia is pretty much best understood as the proportionality of something. Let's break those down. Integritas, as St. Thomas Aquinas calls it, or the integrity of something, what that means is the wholeness or completeness of something, in that nothing is lacking. So often there's a misunderstanding, right, with what constitutes evil or something bad in the world. Evil is not something in itself, but rather it's the privation of good. Darkness isn't something in itself, but rather the absence of light. And for us, when we look at something that's beautiful, we see a wholeness there, a completeness. When it's something lacking, we would say it's less beautiful, but rather the wholeness and the completeness of something, that integritas, that integrity, draws us to outside of ourselves. When we encounter something that is integral, that is whole, we encounter something that's truly beautiful. Where there's no lack, there's no privation, there's nothing missing. The whole thing is there. That's something which we would say is one of the constitutive and founding elements of something being beautiful, that it is integral. The second one which he raises for us is called claritas, or translated clarity. Well, what does that mean? Clarity for us means that we're able to perceive that which is before us. There's no kind of impediment to us encountering that which is beautiful. There's a clarity to it. We know what's being communicated to us. Now, that doesn't mean to say that sometimes, and very often actually, some of the most beautiful things we encounter are veiled. There's some kind of veil before them because we're not actually prepared or even capable of encountering them as they should be encountered. So that's always been part of our understanding of beauty, that those things which are sacred are often veiled. But there's not an obscurity, and there's a difference there. For something to be clear and to be experiencing the level of claritas would be that it communicates what it sets out to do. It's not obscure, but very often veiled. Beauty for us is something that constantly reveals itself. One does not simply look at a beautiful painting once, or look upon the Mona Lisa for a few seconds and then is satisfied and walks on. But rather, when we encounter something that's beautiful, the clarity being so overwhelming, it draws us into a relationship with it, in that we now contemplate that beauty which is before us and desire to go deeper. The clarity is there though. The clarity is there, but not fully comprehended and exhausted. Clarity does not mean that we've exhausted the beauty and it's all laid out before us, but rather there's an ability and there is a potential whereby we can go deeper because of the clarity of what is before us. And for that reason, it is one of the constitutive elements of making something beautiful, is that there is clarity. The third one, consonantia, best probably translated or understood as proportionality. Well, what does that mean with regards to something being beautiful? So often we'll see if you go to an art gallery, there's many things that are competing for your attention. Different framings, different kind of ways in which something is presented, all trying to compete for your attention. Let's think back to the cathedrals, the great cathedrals of the church that you go into. There's a certain proportionality and harmony when you go in there, that nothing really is trying to compete with something else, but rather they exist as a whole, coming back to that first principle of integrity. The proportionality says that there's not some kind of competition going on where one thing is trying to outdo the other, but rather all the elements of something being beautiful exist in a harmony, that there's a harmony with it. Think of when there's music being performed. If one of the artists decides to do something completely different to all the others, suddenly the entire piece falls apart. Suddenly the entire composition becomes jeopardized and sinks away from what it was actually meant to be. But a consonatio would say that there's a proportionality and there's a relationship existing between all of those parts, which brings about something which is truly beautiful. That's why for St. Thomas Aquinas, and we would say, that third principle, consonatio, the proportionality, is a constitutive element of something being beautiful, something drawing us deeper into the life of the Church, the life of Christ himself, and outside of ourselves.